marching toward a nuclear war with China as quickly as we can. What do you see as how do we step away from the brink? What can we all do, and what can the world do? This is, I mean, the lives of all of us are at stake, as you know.
So I was listening to John Mearsheimer. I tend to agree with, I think.
All right. Well, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, everyone. Welcome to our WERN webinar.
The two speakers, Carl and Christian, liked all your information, and thanks for the little humor thrown in there. Modernization of the American nuclear program is going full forward, as Christian said. I remember back in the mid-60s, they talked about using a tactical weapon to dig the canal in Nicaragua. Panama was up in arms about something. Fortunately, that voted down. One of the Democrats, Marianne Williamson, when she ran last time, she talked about creating a Department of Peace. And wouldn't that be a kick in the buns? You know, would the MAGA people, come out in droves to protest that? I wonder. But also that, we've seen in our past, millions of people, 1 million people in the street, no effect whatsoever. Like my friend was talking about, Third Act is a group of seniors over 60, and they've been blocking traffic in Washington. And I had the honor to do that not too long ago. And I don't know, we have to get their attention. That it's like, okay, the militarization of the police force, that's to keep, those old folks out of the street, I guess. But again, thank you for your presentation as well. I learned a lot. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. 3 more questions.
Thanks very much to both of you for your excellent presentation. As you've said, we are really marching toward a nuclear war with China as quickly as we can. What do you see as how do we step away from the brink? What can we all do, and what can the world do? This is, I mean, the lives of all of us are at stake, as you know.
So I was listening to John Mearsheimer. I tend to agree with him. I think as long as the U.S. government is not going to push the Taiwan independence button, the risk of war with China is relatively low, because that if Taiwan declare formal independence, yes, there's a very high probability of war breaking out. But as long as the U.S. do not push the button, I think the two sides more likely to settle into a Cold War situation where U.S. will use the hybrid warfare, which is informational warfare. They will wage economic warfare, which is what they're doing right now against China, to keep the tension up so the military-industrial complex can sell more weapons. That's my take. I don't think it's their intention to blow up the world right now. What do you think, Christian?
I agree with what you just said, but I would also add that there's room to maneuver and room for optimism here in the United States with the unionization across racial lines that I mentioned, but also overseas. Governments, London, Canberra, Berlin to a certain extent, they follow U.S. government's lead on these things. And they're client states in that sense. And there's room for rift, for maneuver over there between the ruling classes in those countries, in addition to the ruling classes in South Korea and Japan, and their respective poor and working classes in those countries who have a better understanding of history than the American public, and who are tired of being dragged into more and more U.S.-led conflict. And so there's optimism there. There's room to maneuver there. And I would also say, can we stop being afraid? What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of here in the United States? We already live in the dystopia. It's already here. I mean, they can't kill us all. They can't imprison us all. It's like, what are we so scared of? The U.S. ruling class is the worst, greediest bunch of horrible people ever assembled. I mean, and they're leading us down to what are we scared of? Stop being afraid. We have to stop being afraid. And I'll leave it to people on the local and state level to take their own initiative. But it's just like, we got to stop being afraid. and start loving one another as we rally.
Thank you. And it's right.
Hey, Josh Telper, thank you. I appreciate you guys giving context and everything. So it's been really interesting. My question is so it sounds like the solution is for everybody to stop being afraid at once. And my question is, like, human history demonstrates that people are incapable of doing that, or so far have been. So like, what is a realistic proposal to de-escalate arms races in situations like this? I mean, it's a common thing with humanity. Proxy wars have been going on since the beginning of time. So, what is the realistic proposal and steps to de-escalate arms races and to stop human conflict? Over.
So I would say, first of all, let's establish democracy in the United States. Let's establish democracy in the United States. Okay? And then we get rid of the US ruling class that hates you anyway, hates you. You're a pawn to them. So we establish democracy, and then we'll have a referendum. And that referendum for the American public will decide, do you want to try to pry Taiwan off of mainland China? Do you want to send your sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers to go and fight that war? We have the connection right now through the internet to everyone on this planet. We are connected. It's a handful of people who hate you. Hate you, Josh. They don't care about you. So let's establish democracy in the United States, and then we'll see where it goes.
And another talking about de-escalating tensions, I think it's very easy. Just don't be a dick. Just don't be a dick in your international relations. I mean, right now it's the U.S. that's being a dick. The U.S. and China actually had a productive relationship for a while. From late 1970s all the way till, I say, early 2000. And what really changed was, as Christian mentioned, around the first Obama administration, under Hillary Clinton. This is when I guess the Hillary Democrats had decided they're going to pivot. They're going to pivot to being the national security Democrat. They want to take the national security issue away from the Republicans. So they're going to be fully backing the Pentagon, and that's how the pivot to Asia happened. And pivot to Asia was not a economic pivot. It's not pivoting U.S. investment into the region. It's pivoting military deployment, military postures, and that of course that's going to raise tension. I mean, if we could just go back to the pre-2008 level of relationship with China, things will be fine. But it's really easy choice to make. But right now, for whatever reason, our ruling class is not choosing to do that. They're choosing a course of confrontation. And from the Chinese side, it's not China that's aiming for confrontation with the United States. They just want to do business. They will do business with whoever wants to do business with them. And so the question really, it's really the U.S. that's right now that's stirring up the tension. So as Christians pointed out, the problem lays in our ruling class. What the hell is wrong with them? Somebody need to slap them into their senses or replace them.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of good quotes out of this session tonight, I want to say. I'm going to quote you, Carl and Christian. Okay, hey, John, you have the last question here.
I want to thank the panel for their insights on the Mickey Mat. I think that comes from Ray McGovern, if I'm not mistaken. There is a quote from Upton Sinclair. It's hard to make someone understand something when their livelihood depends on their not understanding it. And I think the insight from that quote leads me to take issue with what Christian is saying about the small minority of psychopathic CEOs. We're not dealing with a small minority here. We're dealing with millions of people whose livelihoods depend upon their work with the weapons industry. Now, I'm a fully retired but still absent-minded psychology professor. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about social psychology and the fundamental attribution error.
Hang on a
Which is
second,
that-
John, let's, if you can pose, instead of giving that talk, maybe you can write something in the chat. Can we
I will, okay.
give a question to Christian? Maybe that is your question about the
Well,
many
it's-
people whose livelihoods depend on
yes,
this.
I think it may be a mistake to rely too much on the rhetoric of calling the CEOs psychopaths and using psychiatric labels to explain what's going on with those folks.
Thank you.
That's what I wanted to say.
No, I appreciate that. That's it's important. Labels are important. I said sociopaths, and I believe there's a distinction. I believe psychopaths a little harsher, but I am not a trained physician or clinician. In terms of people, so I imagine you're referring to the people who are employed by the U.S. war industry. Is that it?
People who are employed by corporations that are manufacturing weapons,
Okay.
people who are in uniform who are trained to operate those weapons.
All right. So let me take that one by one. The jobs of the U.S. war industry are about a third of what they were in the Cold War. Just like every other industry, the U.S. ruling class is exporting your job, sending it overseas where they can, including to India and Mexico. Okay. And they automate the rest. Okay. And as anybody who's worked in a factory can tell you, the pay is a little bit better in the war industry, but only for those who have, or particularly for those who have advanced degrees. Engineers, physicists, they make the real big bucks. Okay. And as anybody who's in the unions unite and they work together. But there are several polls that indicate that unions, particularly the machinist unions and some of the shipbuilders, they have no problem as long as they have their job. And that could be a federal jobs guarantee during the transition, or it could be building ships for anything. As long as they have their job, that's what they care about. And you mentioned uniform, people in uniform. People join the U.S. military, and this, according to the Pentagon's own statistics, people join the U.S. military for economic reasons. They are there, for a steady paycheck, for healthcare. They are there for loan repayment. They're there for college tuition. They're there for in-service tuition assistance and many other things that the U.S. the military recruiters dangle. So it is an economic decision. They're not there primarily for patriotism, although they do occasionally wrap their decision to enlist in the flag. But that's particularly why we need to be so effective in mobilizing, because we need to acknowledge and understand that this is an economic decision, and that if the U.S. ruling class actually cared for the American public by investing in education, lowering the cost of education, taking it out of corporate hands, and addressing the nature of the corporation itself, there are a lot of steps that the U.S. Public can take if we lived in a democracy. And so our goal is to establish democracy in this country. There's no democracy in the workplace, and there's no democracy at the ballot box. We are allowed to vote, absolutely, but you get your choice from two parties that, particularly these days, are controlled by big business interests. And with regard to labels, I'm going to continue to call them sociopaths, because that's the behavior that they demonstrate again and again and again. The criteria that I listed are the sociopathic criteria. That is the behavior of the top corporate executives, and that is a result of the structure of absolutely having to maximize short-term profit. I mean, I'm sorry if I offend a CEO's, feelings, but I think, John, you and I are on the same page that we need to be better with messaging, but we also need to understand that from a jobs perspective, the jobs are going down because they're exporting and automating as many as possible anyway. And so either we rally now, or we get continually stuck with, fewer and fewer jobs and worse hours. And, the key is unionization across racial lines as a working class, and, learning to love your neighbor in the process. But the sociopath at the top is not our neighbor. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ben. Carl, do you have maybe a last word to offer for the webinar?
I don't have anything. I mean, I think if there's anyone have a specific question, I'll respond to that, but I don't have anything.
Okay.
I
Or
didn't
did you
prepare
have
a
anything
speech,
to add
sorry.
to what Christian just said about the response about the war economy? Actually, maybe you want to say something about that.
Well, I mean, because right now what U.S. government is doing is military cleansiness, because they are rather than investing in infrastructure, rather than investing in education, they just do what's easiest, what come natural for them, which is continue to feed the war machine. But it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, U.S. is they group everything until this national security umbrella, but U.S. homeland is incredibly secure. It has two modes, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean. So right now we are really talking about the overreach of the U.S. empire in Europe, in East Asia, in Africa. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think a lot of the Americans today are already aware of the problem, because we are all dealing with high inflation, dismal job prospect for our youth. But instead the two parties, they're just dividing us on social issues, because it's easy for them to take a stand on divisive social issues to distract us from the real problem, which is this is a dysfunctional system. This is a dysfunctional system that's not working out for the majority of the people. And it's time for us to wake up and demand change.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add that we have the issue of people being invested in the war economy. We've actually addressed that in our webinars, some of our webinars along the way. And we've had 2 webinars at least that have explicitly spoken about the conversion of the war economy, and how that's possible, how it's happening in some places. And, people's jobs can be protected, and you can get more jobs actually if you stop investing in the military industrial complex and invest in things like health and education and infrastructure and all that clean energy. And that's research. We know that. We're ending on a good note here. Brian Garvey, I saw that you wanted to have a word here. Do you want to speak up?
I was just responding to Carl because he was asking for a cue, but I don't think he really needed it. The question was on my mind, though. I just put in the chat. It seems like our diplomats are not doing the job. I wonder if there are opportunities for citizen diplomacy. They're trying to demonize China and the Chinese people. I think the best way to combat that is for our people to meet each other and realize that we are not the monsters that our governments make us out to be. I would love to see more of that. I didn't know if Carl, if you had any knowledge of programs like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that people's to people exchange are the best to dispel a lot of these war propaganda. And I highly encourage people to go, visit China. Seeing is believing. All you read about China is what the corporate media is printing out. You're getting a very distorted picture. And I'm hoping, there's more Americans travel outside their borders to see the world. It's the world is a wonderful place, and it's not full of dangers, and that's all I got to say.
That's another quote I'm taking from you. Okay, well, this has been fabulous, and let me thank you both, Christian and Carl. And you may not realize it, folks, but Carl, it's morning for Carl. He's calling in from Bali, Indonesia. So thank you for being part of this from across the world there, Carl. We're going to call it quits. I want to remind you that we have another webinar coming up September 27th. And Paul brought that up at the beginning of our webinar. It's about lobbyists and think tanks, pushing us into war. I also want to mention that we are in the works of creating we have webinars scheduled for the next couple of months, and we're in the works of creating another webinar about China because it's such a huge, crucial issue. And KJ No has agreed to be with us in the beginning of November. If you know who he is, you can Google him. NOH, KJ No. Is that how you say his name, Carl? Is it No or Noy? I've heard both. Yeah, okay. So anyway, so thank you all for being here. It's been a long session. It's been a really rewarding and educational session. Appreciate you all. Appreciate Carl and Christian. And let's keep at it, folks. Peace to all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.